Yeah.
when it comes to justice, the culprit has to be punished, even if that culprit belongs to your
Right.
baradari, and you need to take the side of the victim in this scenario. So this is what Islam, I think, talks about. So what we need is basically this culture of integrity, where it is possible to trust people. For example, if I give you loan, or if you give me loan, then you have this confidence that I'm going to pay you back. Unfortunately, it is becoming very common in Pakistan that if you give somebody a loan, that the possibility of receiving it back is
So,
almost
so,
near to zero, unfortunately.
so
So
here's the line for this, right? Either you give away or you walk away. So if you're
yeah,
giving somebody money, you
yeah,
better believe
yeah,
you'll
you
never
must,
get it. And
yeah,
then
exactly,
if you can't afford to lose that money, don't give it away. Because
yeah,
it
exactly.
will save your relationships.
So,
It
so
will
if you
save.
if you have that kind of a social environment, then don't think about an Islamic economic model to actually emerge from out of that.
But how much of that is like, the economic desperation? Part of that is also the economic desperation. Part of that is also that they're not, uh, when you talk about you know, the responsibility of the government in Islamic sense and Islamic polity, if you want to conceptualize that, if it is not to provide education, if it's not to provide healthcare, what is it?
Originally, it was to provide protection. It was
Security,
to equalize if there is too much difference in wealth distribution going on in different areas. And for example, there is lots of wealth in one area, and there is another area where there is some kind of crisis going on, and then the government might intervene, and they would say, okay, fine, we need to transfer some resources from this place to another. Um, there were like, I mean, if you divide the whole set of duties, 90% of them were done by the people themselves, and probably 10% of them were done by the state or the government or
Mm.
whatever you call it, the political authority of that particular time.
So the economic justice, to your point, like, when you mentioning that, the social decay of the society in Pakistan with respect to uh, trust or mistrust.
Yeah,
You know, the
yeah,
so economic justice impacts the social construct and the social history of society. And a lot of these like cases that we see in Pakistan,
yeah,
of mobile snatching and all of these people that coming in and they have gone, they snatch things from you and jewelry and things of that nature.
yeah.
That is a side effect of the economic injustice.
Yeah, it's a kind of vicious cycle people are actually got stuck into, I think.
Mm.
Um, Lots of things are, lots of structural things are creating poverty. And as a result of this poverty and economic injustice, you can find crime emerging in lots of areas in this sense. Um, but ultimately, it is the responsibility of the people also. If the government is not taking care of things, then people need to come forward. And you see lots of examples in Pakistan where people are actually doing a lot to, uh, for example, redistribute wealth, provide free healthcare. So there are lots of examples of these kind of things already
Eid
happening.
is a classical example, right? Eid Foundation
Yeah,
of the world.
and a lot can happen if people stop blaming and they start assuming responsibility, because a lot of people can actually do a lot of stuff,
But then, okay,
but
then the point becomes like, taxation, right? The purpose of taxation is to, in the contemporary institution,
in the
right, of the
contemporary
government.
model is to, I mean, the whole, yeah, exactly, the whole idea of taxation kind of shifts the responsibility of the government. And
Right.
people are like, yeah, okay, we are paying this much amount of tax, then why the hell we should take care of all of these social issues ultimately?
And the accountability of the government, right?
Yeah.
There's other point.
So it's a kind of a vicious cycle where one thing contributes to the other, and ultimately it's the other thing further adds to the problem that we are actually facing ultimately. So I was adding one more thing that I mean, if the kind of mindset that Islam actually creates, if injustice is happening to you, for example, if I'm facing injustice, then I'm not supposed to do injustice onto others. I'm supposed to
Oh.
uh, remain just in my conduct. as
That's a very high
possibly,
character, yeah.
as much as possible. I mean, I cannot give, since somebody did wrong to me and I'm going to do wrong to other people. I mean, this is not
If
the
some,
economic
so is it
mindset.
like, so again, like the classical example is like, is it, allowed to steal from a thief, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is, I think, uh, the there are lots of fundamental issues in this sense that probably restricts creation of a very genuine Islamic society where it is possible to do that. I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't need government to intervene. I mean, people can, themselves change their habits, change their attitudes, change their behavior, and you'll find a lot of good happening on so many different levels. So it doesn't require government. I mean, I keep giving example of this, the litter on the streets. If you go to Japan, if you go to China, you don't find a lot of litter there on their streets, and it is not really the government. Especially if you go to Japan, uh, you
But to
uh,
your point, Omar bhai, I mean, correct, that you don't see the litter there, but at the same time in Pakistan, you don't I don't know, like, if they have a proper system of waste management. What I mean by that is, in the Japan, people know, okay, you throw the trash in the trash can and the government come and pick up the waste and they will manage it, right? Whether that's through a private institution or not. Same thing with China. In
I've been there.
Pakistan, I don't.
I've been there. I've been to Japan twice,
Okay.
and I think it's 90% the people themselves and 10% the government, because I don't find government anywhere, honestly, picking up the trash. And
So what happens when you throw the trash in the garbage? Then what
people
happens?
were super careful. For example, in Pakistan, you have bins, and people will do target practice on that bins. And if the litter falls on the side of the road, they're not going to pick it up and put it back inside the bin,
Mm.
despite the fact the bin is there. So, and you'll find places, for example, the place where I live, there are bins and they are emptied by the government on regular basis. Still, you have a lot of litter because people are simply careless. They don't
Mm.
have the right attitude to put the garbage at the right place. And you don't teach the same to the kids, and the kids are throwing litter all over the place. And so I see it's more of a responsibility, irresponsibility of the general public. I was giving example of Japanese. They went to Qatar in when there was a football cup going on, and they literally cleaned the whole place. The part of the stadium they were occupying, they literally cleaned that place, and they cleaned the dressing room and everything. Despite I mean, who came to them and told them that if you're not going
But
to do that, you're going to be penalized?
remember, that again comes back to the concept of education. That is a principle that they learn in schools very early on, right? In their kindergarten and this what we call however we want to define schooling, right? But again, like that's
Yeah.
where like the tarbiyah comes in.
Yeah. If you talk about Islamic history, it was all done through tarbiyah.
Right.
The primary education was basically tarbiyah. It was done by the parents themselves, the community itself. It was not outsourced to some other authority somewhere else. The teachers were from the community themselves. So, if let's suppose the government is not taking responsibility at this point in time, people are the ones who are suffering because of that.
Mm.
And instead of taking responsibility and saying, okay, fine, we can take care of this particular issue ourselves. It is possible for us to do that. But let's do this. They're not doing it, unfortunately, despite the fact they have the capacity and it is within their reach. Since they have this, mindset that somebody else is going to come and take care of this problem.
Mm. Self-responsibility and self-accountability.
Self-responsibility is absent. There are lots of reckless behavior. Uh, in workplaces, you'll find lots of work ethic issues. I keep giving this example of Pakistani IT industry versus Indian IT industry. There's literally a difference of 20 times. The difference of population is like 5 times, but IT industry is 20 times ahead in terms of exports in India. And when you look at, this is my assessment, I might be wrong. One of the key factors is work ethics. We make commitments, we are going to deliver this particular project in this with this much amount of time, and we are not honoring those commitments with our international clients. And within offices and workplaces, there's lots of politics going on. There's lots of leg pulling. There's lots of toxicity. There's lots of insulting behavior from bosses. And all of these things ultimately affects the overall productivity of the individual companies and ultimately the overall economy also.
I
So
agree
these are
with you
all,
on that, Omar, but at the same time, I think it's not only the work ethic, but also a skill set. Like the skill set in Pakistan, I don't think is as like if you talk about percentage wise, right? I think
um,
this it's strict skill set
yeah,
in you in India, whether that's cybersecurity or whether that is development, that is also part of. The other thing is
agreed,
also as you talk as
agreed.
also you talk about the corporate culture, which I agree with. But I think one of the things that I have experienced is when you have a small company,
Yeah,
let's say we have a small company of say 50 people, 10 people, 30 people, that's a small company,
yeah,
right? And the employee there, he knows that he doesn't have growth. But if you're
mhm,
working in a company of like say 10,000 people,
yeah,
or 20,000 people, they know they have to go up the ladder. So not
mhm,
it's not only the politics of it, but also the motivation of the person working there. Because if he's working in 100 people company, he knows
yeah.
that's what the scope is.
Yeah, maybe. Um, but the work ethic issue is quite prevalent in literally every nook and corner of the whole society. It is not
Correct.
just the IT company. I mean, it is, for example, if you
Absolutely.
go to a carpenter, ask them to make some furniture for you, and you'll find work ethic issues there also. You go to a literally handyman, he would make you commit, like, I'm going to come in an hour, and he's going to come probably after 3 days, or maybe he might not even come despite committing to you that he's going to come. I mean, this is prevalent, like, literally all over the place,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So, like 1.5 years ago, we were moving to another place, and we had to deal with lots of carpenters and lots of these kind of technicians, and we faced lots of work ethic issues. And we were literally like, I mean, this whole thing could have been done in like a 2 months time, and it took us 6 months just because people were making commitments to us, and they were literally not honoring them the way they were actually. So there are lots of recklessness, lots of careless attitude when it comes to commitments. For example, there is a lot of ultimately that leads to trust issues. Um, I mean, how would you trust somebody if you, for example, pay them advance and expect them to, deliver you something after, let's say, a month time? So, and that kind of creates an environment where, it's difficult to practice a lot of these uh, what Islam has actually taught us to practice in this sense, in terms of our engagement with other people in the marketplace or socially. Um, it creates a lot of hurdles ultimately. So we have to have this foundation first.
So where
That
do so again, like coming back to the point, right, of reintroduction of like decolonization of the mindset and uh, developing the Islamic morality and the Islamic mindset for these. Where do we start with?
where do we
And
start? That's a very good question. Um, this will probably start from the masjid itself, where the ulama have to, or the individual who is addressing the people, the khatib, the alim ad-din has to walk the talk. I mean, they're just talking right now. They're not walking the talk right now.
also like as we
But
discussed, like the colonization of madrasa is another topic, right?
yeah,
Because the contemporary madrasa curriculum is not what we used to have, and also with the
yeah,
introduction of this thought where we have to stay within the confine of the current socioeconomic structures, staying within
yeah,
the system and making it Islam or Islamicizing it or colonization. What I call it colonization of Islam, and I think you call it like what the instruments and the systems of the colonial uh,
yeah.
entities,
I,
right?
I can use the same term, of course. Yeah,
Yeah. So again, going back to the point is like when you're talking about like the ulama and the imam and the khatib, it's
yeah. I
I
mean, we
think
need to.
at some point also, Omar bhai, at some point we all have to take that responsibility of learning the basics of the deen, like the aqaid, the fiqh, and at least
Yeah,
at the fundamental, like the basic level. I mean, not
that's given,
everybody
of course.
becomes.
That's definitely given. Um, and if, for
And
example, if
Arabic, I think one of the main things is like unfortunately what happened, and it's probably see wherever the Khulafai Rashidun went at that time, Arabic became quote unquote like the naturally the language of the system.
Yeah.
And particularly in the subcontinent, I think after the Mughals, right, the language of the state of the or the elite was Farsi. So,
Yeah.
and then we had the derivation of Urdu from Hindi and Farsi and whatnot. So I think what I'm trying to say is, Shah Waliullah Muhammad Rahmatullah, like, he saw that as a gap. And what he did was he said, okay, let's translate Quran into Urdu. So like the common people, they don't know Arabic and they will learn
Yeah, they can
Arabic.
understand. Yeah.
They can understand it. But unfortunately, what happened is that same thing got transferred into like the Islamic education model. Like there aren't many Islamic madaris or the Islamic seminaries where they're being taught in Arabic. They're being taught either in Urdu or other language, whatever their local language is. So we think of Arabic, again, going back to the initial part of our discussion, talk about decolonization in English, right? We should have like taught about that in Arabic. And then I think this is also a thing that uh, what I call like the decolonization of the madrasa system as well, because that education has to be in Arabic, good enough that they can communicate. We all can communicate because there is a direct link, to Quran and Hadith and Sirah. And like, we have like 1400 years worth of heritage, intellectual, academic heritage in Arabic. Uh, so I think again, coming back
Hmm.
to so that is
Um,
the point.
there's lots of debate on this. Should the education be in the mother tongue or should it be in some foreign language? If it is in a foreign language, then it takes a lot of time for individuals to master that language to an extent that they literally start thinking and dreaming in that language also. I mean,
Absolutely agree with you. No, Omar
that's
bhai, I
like,
totally agree with you because if you look at the G7 countries, right, Japanese, they teach in Japanese,
yeah,
Russian, French, everybody teaches in their own mother tongue. I absolutely agree, like the language, but even in Pakistan, we're being taught in English. We're not being taught
yeah,
in Urdu or
do you?
Pashto or Punjabi or Sindhi or
Hmm.
the other languages. But even when we talk about the golden age of Islam, everything was translated from Greek and Latin and Hindi into Arabic. Arabic was a state language, and same thing like when we talk about Renaissance and the
When was
translation
that?
phase.
When was that? The golden age? Can you remind me?
Well, to me, I mean, when I say golden age,
Yeah,
to us, the Muslims, the golden age for me is the time of the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the
yeah,
Khulafai Rashidun. And
yeah.
now,
That needs
like
to be specified. Yeah,
right, so but that's not what the colonial times they have called it
yeah,
a different time period as a golden age. But for me
yeah,
and for Muslims, the time was Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the 30 years after that, the Khulafai Rashidun. That was like the
yeah,
prime model. If you want to model something, we have to model it based on that time frame. To
yeah,
me, that is our because that's all manhaj and nabuwa, right? In social science and economic science and political science and justice science, and everything else. Um, but again, I was coming to the point of because in Islam and particularly, um, when I'm talking about like Arabic, I'm talking about like the divine knowledge, right? The divine knowledge in Arabic, from Islamic
mm,
perspective, right? And throughout history, the very first thing anybody, like even in contemporary times, if you go to Africa, if you go to like Arab, and if you go to another language, the first thing they teach you is Arabic. Once you understand Arabic, then you go into understanding the literature. Because of course, as you said, like once if you cannot think in that language, you will not understand the depth of that language and the
yeah.
literature. So I'm not talking
Um,
when I talk about Arabic, I'm talking about particularly like in the madrasa system in Pakistan.
yeah.
Because if you look at the structure of the madrasa system in Pakistan as well, when I say Pakistan, I should not say Pakistan, the subcontinent, all the way across,
Arabic, I
right?
think it's very much because the all madrasa student I have interacted with, they are very well versed in Arabic. They read and write very fluently in
Hmm.
Arabic language, and I don't think this is a. I mean, at least the madrasa system which I'm aware of in Pakistan are very much focusing on that aspect. They definitely teach Arabic, and the students are. I mean, as far as
They
my
teach
I
Arabic, but they
observe,
do not teach in Arabic as a language. Like, so what I mean by that is
some
like, I'll give an example. There's a lot of people who have masters in English, but they cannot talk English. There's a lot of people who have masters in English literature, but that's theoretical knowledge. And I think I'm not denying that they're not teaching Arabic. I'm saying is the
Hmm.
depth of Arabic is a totally different. And again, to the point of being Muslims, and we were talking about everybody, because in Islam and
Yeah,
Quran
I think
itself, Allah
if you
uh,
ask me to prioritize what should be the most urgent thing that needs to be addressed in madrasa system, I wouldn't dispute the significance of um, the uh, significance of learning Arabic language and understanding Quran, for example, and Hadith in the language it is written. But right now, probably we need something more of a revolution of the heart. Right now, whatever is being taught, even Arabic language, those who are very well versed in Arabic language are only using their brains. They're not involving their hearts. And we know
you're talking about
from
tazkiyah here.
a tazkiyah perspective that hearts needs to be involved in the whole process. You have this uh, couplet from well, Iqbal used to talk about quite a lot. That, for example, खिर्द ने कह भी दिया क्या ला इला तो क्या हासिल दिलो निगाह मुसलमान नहीं तो कुछ भी नहीं और uh, there was another uh, verse something like that कि uh, uh, बेखतर कूद पड़ा आतिश नमरूद में इश्क खिर्द है अभी अकल है महुए तमाशा लबे बाम अभी something like that. He keeps differentiating what your mental understanding of Islam and what your
Mm.
emotional engagement with the whole. So right now
Spiritual engagement, I would
you
call it.
can yeah, spiritual engagement. Yeah, you can teach Arabic language. You can still remain at the level of the brain.
No, no,
Uh,
no, I understand that.
the more urgent issue is how do we get down to the level of the heart? Because your motivation, your intentions, your attitudes, your behaviors are rather driven by what's in your heart.
Yeah, I am
And
also like, when you talk about decolonization, like, I said like a lot of things that we're discussing right now. Iqbal said that, including about the banking system, like a century ago. I think one of the things we do not realize about Iqbal and Jinnah and all of these greats and the thinkers of that time is that they had they were here and they were like from the subcontinent, and Iqbal particularly had a little bit more of Islamic upbringing, and they went to Europe at a very volatile time.
yeah,
They saw the demise of Ottoman Empire. They
yeah,
saw the First World War.
yeah,
The political environment there was very vibrant, and it was even in the context of Europe and America, it was shifting because the
yeah,
political powers changed from like from the English Empire to the American system.
yeah.
Whether we want to call it empire or not, that's another discussion. But my point being is that the depth and understanding they had at that time because they were in that context. Again, going
Yeah,
back to your initial point that we have to have people who understand the scenarios and the context. And if we
yeah.
just go back to what Iqbal said and just implement it in education and in economics and his philosophy, that I mean, I'm not saying
You
listen
know,
to us. I'm just saying
you know
listen to
when
Iqbal.
you when you're going to give
Decolonization
this
through Iqbal.
when you going to advise, okay, we should be rather bringing Iqbal into our education curriculum. Somebody is going to make a course out of it and start teaching that Iqbal in a very conventional style, the way it is being taught. They're not
Like
going to
Hawala
change.
and Tashri. Like give me a
You
Hawala and give
exactly
me a Tashri.
you exactly you will have all of you should memorize all of these ashar and eventually have to ratify all the tashri and eventually give an exam and nobody's going to realize ki what kind but the people you're basically making people hate Iqbal like this if you're going to teach Iqbal
Hmm.
in this particular manner. If you don't
Hmm.
want people to read Iqbal for the rest of their life, please start teaching that into school the way it is being taught right now.
Hmm.
So, what we
Very
need to
interesting
do
point.
is,
Okay. But if you have to
so
like learn Iqbal, then you have to understand Urdu and Farsi, right?
yeah. I mean, if you want to teach, we need to first understand what exactly teaching means and how it should be restructured. And what
Hmm.
exactly, for example, is the role of the mentors. I mean, teacher right now, the paid employees who come there and they literally just vomit all of what they know in front of the
Hmm.
students. Students take notes, or they write down the stuff on the board, and the student take notes, and they're going to vomit again on the piece of a paper in the examination, and they're like, okay, fine, we are done. Everything that you teach become an instrument to pass the exam. I mean, let me give you a quick example. I mean, I was having this discussion about students. There's a possibility of a nuclear war right this week, and if the nuclear war happens between Russia and, for example, in different European countries, the whole world economic order is going to drastically shift. It might lead to third world war. It might change everything. We might not be even here the next week talking to each other. And the student asked me this question right immediately after this conversation. Are we going to have this in the exam or not? That was like 3 months ahead. Can you imagine what's happening? I mean, the whole discussion was literally being seen in a very different context in the current uh, model of engagement that I had with the students.
I think that's very
Cool.
important that we, as you said, like from the analytical perspective, and essentially what you're trying to do is trying to think, trying for them to think in this context, in this fashion, right?
This is not possible in the contemporary environment. I mean,
Correct.
where we are,
So,
I mean,
what are these
we have,
students like? Graduate, postgraduate? What was the level of their education?
they were graduate students,
Okay.
literally. I mean, you literally teach them
One
anything.
of the things what has happened is in again, academia is this peer reviewed article system, which is again, I think, a way of, well, confining the thought in the way, right? Whenever you put out a paper in there and you think about, you have to have so many different references from so many different people, which is, and in essence, it's good. So like, the student kind of like widens up. But at the same time, I think at some point, they just become so much entangled in just getting references and putting them in the paper that they just, they miss the mark on analyzing and kind of like getting to the core and the heart of the purpose of it.
The core issue in what I was saying and what you were saying is that, everything is now instrumentalized for certain meaningless numbers.
Right.
Some institutional authorities say, oh, these numbers are important. For example, how many citations you have, how many papers you have. For students, how many numbers you are getting in the examination. So there are some numbers, and everybody's chasing some
Some
numbers.
metrics, right?
Exactly. And whatever you are teaching and whatever you are writing in research articles or whatever content students are trying to learn has become an instrument to chase some numbers. And once the numbers are, you get the numbers, for example, on a piece of paper, somebody say, okay, fine, this is the numbers you've got. All of that effort is now, does not have any meaning in any other context. So this is a very serious problem. I mean, you teach them about something that can, be very beneficial from the point of view of their life after death, for the success in Akhira, for example, and they would be like, okay, fine, how many number this is going to get us, and they get the
Right.
numbers, and the entire focus is not. Then focus is never getting to the Akhira. Why? Because everything is instrumentalized for those numbers.
Let's forget the okay. Their I think focus is not even for their own future in this world, because they just
Absolutely,
focus
absolutely.
on, and I think like
The
you bring a very important point of mentorship, but I think like to a certain extent that mentorship still exists in the contemporary Islamic seminaries or the madrasa systems or
yeah.
however we want to define them.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think well,
Though I do agree that they have kind of like got into this examination
yeah.
model of like,
If you talk about
numbers.
radically changing the structure of the education, what we need to do is to literally rethink how we engage a child with any content of learning. If you talk about, for example, there's this concept in education called problem-based learning. And
Mhm.
in problem-based learning, what you do, you first expose a student with some problems, real life problems, without them knowing any solution. And they get exposed and then realize, okay, fine, this is how we need to sort out. We don't know how to do that. And those real life scenarios, spark curiosity and motivation to find a solution. And that becomes the motivation for them to learn something. First explore, and for that exploration, they might go to and talk to some teacher or some mentor. And ultimately, that takes them forward step by step. And this is a very, very radically different concept of,
Okay, so
education.
just something popping on. This is very similar to what we would today. I wouldn't call it similar, but you know how they do like residencies or the house jobs in medical field, right?
Yeah,
Then they have a mentor and they spend like 4, 5,
yeah,
6 years. And same thing
yeah,
with I think as an apprentice, right? They have the
yeah,
concept of
exactly.
engineering, right?
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
they have this concept, but at a very different level for a different purpose.
Exactly. Absolutely. So we need, a very different kind of approach in this sense. And you need to have mentors who should remain there as mentors for a very long period of time. I mean, for a student, for example, who is like 10 years old, let's suppose he gets attached to a mentor and the mentor is still there when he's 20, 25 years old. Right now, what happens? A teacher comes to the school, teach one class, and you don't know the next year where the hell that teacher is. There is
Again,
no
there's no human
emotional,
agency there, right? Coming
there
back to your
exactly
point, there's no
there is no
relationship.
emotional attachment with the teacher, and the teacher is only talking to you about stuff that you are very likely not interested to listen in the first place. Yeah, and he's not even connecting with the kind of challenges you're facing in your personal life. I mean, your personally, you might be, your mind might be thinking about something else. That is why the conventional model of a school has been criticized by almost every expert to kill your curiosity. It kills your creativity. I mean, there are whole books written on these specific problems. How does the conventional model of a schooling system kills your curiosity and kills your creativity? It also kills your compassion. It also kills your empathy. It also kills your any ability to think critically and
And any particular ones that you care to mention at this point?
sorry, come again.
Any particular books or authors that you would
There are a
mention in
lot
this?
of them, and many of them has touched upon like different aspects of the problem. So you might probably have to read a lot of them to get a comprehensive picture. For example, you can explore the work of Sugata Mitra. He's an Indian expert. You can see the work of Ricardo Semler. You can see the work of Frank Smith, John Taylor Gattu, John Holt.
Hmm.
You can see the work of David Orr. You can. There are lots of, and interestingly, all the names which I'm giving you right now are none of them
Are
are Muslim.
non-Muslims?
They're all
Are
non-Muslim.
non-Muslims? See, what I have realized here is, Omar Bhai, there's a lot of problems
Paulo
that
Freire, sorry, Paulo Freire is a very important name here. Paulo Freire
yeah,
is another guy. So
he's a
all of
very
them are
big
not
name in
Muslims.
decolonization education, right?
Yeah,
In the
exactly.
decolonized education, he's a very big name, right?
All of
For
them are not
critical
Muslim.
thinker. So this is what I'm trying to like. This is what I have experienced, right? We have a barter. Like there's some folks here who just do like barter system, right? Um, and Muslims, unfortunately, we are looking for the solutions in our problems in the colonial Western models.
Yeah,
And what the Western society is doing in general is they're saying, well, no, this thing is all wrong. And whether they call it Islam or not, the
yeah.
models that they're coming with are Islamic models. Whether that is in education,
Not
whether
necessarily.
that is in
We have to be very careful here. They can be. I mean, we can. But first, we have to look at the very
no, what I'm, for
ideological
example, like
position.
I'll tell you, like in economic models, right? We were talking about communities. There are communities here who just do transaction in a barter system, which is like mal versus mal, like give mal and take mal,
Yeah,
like take, and they on purpose, are they don't uh, interact in cash in dollars,
yeah.
right?
I mean,
I will go
yeah.
work for you. Go ahead.
In communities where human agency is very much engaged and empowered, in these communities, the solution they are implementing, yeah, they can be, um, taken and they might appear very similar to what Islam might take you. Why? Because Islam also flourished in an environment where you had communities and you had individuals who were doing stuff, not institutions who were like outsourced for the important stuff in your life. So yeah, in that sense, this can be, I would agree with you to
So
some
I think
extent.
I think what I'm trying to say is that instead of looking the answers into the Western models, we have to look back into the pre-colonial
Yeah.
Islamic models. And like for us, it is the first like 30 years, like
And
of
again, I
colonial.
would again quote lots of Western authors who are also advocating that we need to look back and we need to look at
Mhm.
these indigenous communities
So
and
why is
look
there
at
that
the,
we don't have Muslim authors for that? Let's put it that way.
I have no idea.
And I will
So
just say, like, because that's my point. Like, the intellectual thought and I mean, and again, like yourself, you're talking about these things, but you're not traditionally trained Islamic scholar. Even though you're saying, okay, we should do this, but if you go to like, the traditional Islamic seminaries or the madrasas,
yeah,
they will go back
they
and
are
tell you the exactly the opposite. So even
they
within
are
the Muslim, the point I'm trying to make is the most of the counter thought that is coming within
yeah,
Islam is coming from like the westernized scholars or the people who have come like learn and study the Islamic
yeah,
the
probably they
westernized
understand
institutions.
I think these are the individuals like myself, or for example, if you talk about Dr. Wahab Suri, or if you talk about Dr. Javaid Ansari, or maybe Dr. Asad Zaman, or maybe, there are lots of people who are trying to, all of them are educated in Western academia, and probably because of their exposure to the West, they have a contrast. They're able to see
Um,
how it is actually like to be in that Western institutional environment, and what does exactly it does to your heart and mind and soul. The probably the Islamic scholarship is, they do not have that kind of exposure, and for
um,
that reason, their knowledge is mostly based on the textbooks, and the literature they have probably read somewhere, and that is not sufficient enough, and because they are not really getting into details, and probably that is why, since they are not unable to understand, they are seeing institutions as tools, as very neutral tools that can be, and they're like, okay, fine, we can change the individual, and then the individual is,
so
Islamically
again,
motivated, and subsequently the tool is going to be, shifted in the right direction.
so it is a system or is it the person, right? I guess that is the question. The people or the
Yeah, this
system?
is this is an interesting debate in philosophy also, whether it is the structure or it is the agency. Is it the agency versus structure debate in philosophy?
Mm.
And of course, both have an influence. Human agency has an influence, and when human agency is put inside the structure, and the structure constraints. For example, if you have a big prison where everybody inside in their own cells, every individual might be able to do certain things within their own cells, but when it comes to the entire layout of the whole prison, they cannot really do much about that. And this is exactly what happens in bureaucracy and big institutions, because individuals have, small responsibility. They are inside small silos, and they can only influence to the extent of responsibility they have. They cannot change the big picture. And
That's a very interesting
they
analogy. I
are,
never actually thought about it.
whatever they're doing inside the institution is used by the institution in a particular way, and they have no control over that. For example,
They're
an
just cog
accountant,
in the machine, basically.
absolutely. For example, an accountant can be working inside a masjid. An accountant can be an employee for Waqf. An accountant could be working for a MNC. An accountant could be working for a casino. An accountant could be working for a bank. You know, he might be doing similar things in all of these institutions, but how that institution is using his contribution for the ultimate aim is going to be very different. But why? Because the institution design is different in all of these examples. So there is again a very common misconception in Islamic scholarship in Pakistan, that you change the individual inside the system, and the system is going to change somehow. I mean, they don't realize that these Western institutions are specifically designed to constrain
And
human
it,
agency. And
and that is the
as an
thing that
individual,
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and also the Sahaba Ikram did when they expanded that they changed the system of that fabric of the society. Like it became from like a loose network of
yeah,
individuals and tribal
yeah,
mentality into
yeah,
more of what you call like a different
yeah,
tribe, super
yeah.
tribe or beyond that,
So
beyond the tribe.
yeah, technically speaking, I would not use the term system for the kind of order or social arrangement that Sahaba Karam actually created. Why?
Mm,
Because in modern terms, system something means which is independent of human beings. That does
okay.
not, I mean, you can keep changing the individual, system is not going to change. That is
Mm.
what system actually means. It works independent of any individual influence. If it is influenced by what individuals believe and what they feel like doing, what are their moral values, then it is not a system. It is a group of individuals who are working together for something. All right. But if it's a system in modern sense, it is something that does not get influenced by what you believe as an individual.
So is there
So
like a hybrid in between?
hybrid in what? Sorry.
In the sense of what is like the Islamic model? Is it like a hybrid?
Um,
Because Islam
uh,
puts a lot of emphasis on the character of the person, right?
Absolutely.
And so my point being is when you're trying to restructure it from Islamic perspective, right?
Yeah,
There's a system with a human that has human authority in it of
absolutely. And
decision making.
from Khalifa,
From
you have Khalifa is an individual, right? The Imam of the Masjid is an individual, all right, and his character, his iman, and everything, all of that actually matters. Um, that is, I mean, you can literally take up any example of any interaction happening. For Qazi, for example, is an individual. So all the key positions in Islamic society are not institutions. Even when the people often blame that Muslims did not create educational institutions in Islamic, like we have Oxford and we have Cambridge and we have other institutions in the West. What institutions did Muslims create? I mean, what they fail to understand is that Islamic society was very much individuals. We have big scholars, Shah Waliullah, and you have Imam Abu Hanifa, you have huge
Imam Ghazali, Ibn
Imam
Khaldun,
Ghazali.
Ibn
There's a
Imam
whole list
Razi,
of,
and
exactly.
we
You
carry
have
on, right?
basically big individuals, and they had students, and they had students. So that was how things used to function. Because ultimately, what kind of transition is required in Islamic society is the transition of the human heart, and human heart does not change in absence of um, an individual whose heart. But
From
I mean,
Sadr to Sadr, right?
this
From
is a
heart
kind
to
of
heart.
contagious. You're sober,
It's from
basically.
heart to heart.
Heart, exactly. Heart changes hearts. So that is why individuals has to be there with their right hearts rightly aligned. Um, this is not a mental thing. So when you have institutions, you have the mental capacity of the people involved, and they are working in their specific capacities. For example, when I'm teaching inside a classroom, it is my mind, uh, in a very narrow sense, engaged with the students whose minds are engaged in a very narrow sense. That's it. Their hearts are not there. My heart is probably not there, but my heart is there. Why? Because what I'm teaching really matters to me. But for at
You're
least the
passionate
students,
about what you're teaching. Okay. But
I'm
that's not
passionate
very
about
true
what
in
they
a
teach.
lot of like these institutions, right? Like teachers are teaching because they
Yeah, I mean, you'll find very few individuals who are really teaching because they're really
passionate
passionate
about
about
it.
what. Okay, for
And
example,
economics is another
how do
part
you
of it, right?
become
Yeah.
how do you become passionate about macroeconomics? How do you become passionate about, for example, accounting? I mean, these subjects are not designed in a way that you become passionate about ultimately. Uh, Literally, how do you get passionate? Well, you can find a lot of
Or how
mental.
do you instill that passion into your students? The other point, right?
I don't
I
teach
think
that
purpose.
any. I don't teach any kind of that stuff because what I teach is, for example, the title of my course is social advocacy. For example, it's about
Mm.
social problems and how to try to solve them. All right. Another course which I teach is entrepreneurial society and social impact. There's lots of social issues which I discuss, and ultimately
Morality and ethics,
my
and how does it
morality and
impact?
everything comes into the picture, and subsequently my passion gets involved into what I'm teaching. But if you ask me to teach, for example, strategic thinking, all right. So, and if you I'm just teaching theories and different methods of strategic decision making, then obviously my passion is not going to be involved to that extent. To some extent, my curiosity might get involved, but passion is something else, of course.
Mm.
So this is the constraint, and this is a very structural constraint. This is what I call structural constraint. And the moment you bring in written examination, this is another structural constraint you are adding. It has absolutely nothing to do with the content of the. You can change the course outline. You can change how you're teaching. For example, you can start using videos, and you can start using chat gpt into the classroom, and you can start bringing in all kind of different tools. But ultimately, if you're taking written exam at the end of the day, it changes the whole dynamics of the uh,
Well, that's a very interesting thing you brought up, like Chat GPT, because again, the
I'm just giving an example. I mean,
right, but it's a
uh,
very good point to we have of the role of AI in education and human agency, right? But we could
yeah.
probably discuss that at some other point, not today.
We have to be again very careful because I cannot expect ChatGPT to do my taskiya. I mean,
Right.
ChatGPT can try very hard to do that. If you ask ChatGPT, though, it can start, giving me advices and everything. But ChatGPT cannot do my taskiya because it has to involve a human individual who can empathize with my condition and his aura and his ambience. All of these things are very subjective. So all of these things has to be there. And in absence of all of these things, of course, taskiya is not really. And this is probably the job of every teacher. I mean, in Islamic education environment, you might be teaching mathematics, but indirectly you're also doing taskiya of your students.
And again, that's
I
like
don't know.
again a concept of like integrated learning or polymath or like interdisciplinary education, where when
Absolutely.
you just not teaching mathematics, right? You know, people talk about algebra, right? Algebra was developed bu- by the scholars who wanted
Al-Khwarizmi, I
to
think it was Al-Khwarizmi.
for
Al-Khwarizmi
Al-Khwarizmi
developed.
because he wanted to devise a method for virasa, right? For the
Yeah,
heritage system, right? So it
yeah,
was devised, and like how many madaris teach algebra now? They don't, right? Same thing with falqiyat, the astronomy, right? Astronomy was such an important topic for us. Like, you know, you talk about Eid and Ramadan, and you know,
yeah,
you start having fights about like when is Eid and when is Ramadan. And astronomy was very important for us for a few reasons. Number one, the Qibla. We didn't have GPS. If you're traveling, you need to know how to figure out where's the Qibla. What is the time of the day
yeah,
for prayers? If it is clouds up there, then how you do? If you're out in the
yeah,
ocean, how do you do that? And also then, you know, the our monthly lunar calendar that we have. So you know,
yeah,
in our education, astronomy had a very very important role, and
yeah,
we on all of these topics, algebra, mathematics, uh, trigonometry, navigation, all of these things are kind of like totally absent
yeah.
from
I just want to add one thing here that all of these subjects were taught in a context where the problem was clear for the students. For example, why you are teaching algebra? But there's a problem at hand right in front of you that you have to distribute inheritance, for example. You need an equation to distribute that. I think as far as I know, this already being taught in lots of madrasa in Pakistan because inheritance distribution is a thing that muftis are supposed to do, advise people eventually, and so they're taught about all of this stuff. Astronomy is also taught to some extent. The point is,
astronomy is
that
sort of like on theory, like both of these things are taught in theory. Like, you know, I don't like when what I mean by that is if you take them out in the ocean, they will not be able to navigate. If you take them out in the sun, like out in the land,
yeah,
yeah, they can
yeah,
theoretically create the
yeah.
mathematical equation and
They
resolve
need
it.
to upgrade and add more practical exposure probably to take
Right,
them,
right,
on a cruise somewhere in the ocean.
right. You know who are
To,
good at it? You know who are good at it?
yeah,
Navy merchants, Navy. Because Navy they
yeah,
are taught because Navy they are taught how to navigate in waters, right? And even with all the GPS and everything else, this is basically their fundamental training. In case like all of the electronics expire, they know they are very good at it.
yeah. So I would just want to add one thing that all of these subjects were taught in a specific context. When a student is learning, for example, algebra in a madrasa, he is aware how it is he's going to apply and what kind of problem he's going to solve using algebra, for example. Or if a student is learning astronomy, then he's quite aware of the fact what kind of problems he's going to ultimately solve. But if you ask a seventh grade students in Pakistan, even in Islamic school, why you're learning algebra in your math class, the only answer he's going to give you is that I need to pass the exam. That's it. I mean, he doesn't have any sense where this knowledge is going to get applied in practical life, what kind of practical challenges this can actually help you with. That entire context is absolutely absent, including in Islamic schools. And ultimately, what happens
Right.
when you disconnect knowledge from practical context, your brain is again instrumentalizing it for the most immediate goal, that is to pass the exam, get some grades, and once you get that, all of that is forgotten, and you
And I
start
think
hating
that's where the
that for the
concept of
rest of your
hikmah
life.
and wisdom comes in, right? That's where the concept of
Yeah,
hikmah comes in, right? Be able to connect knowledge with the real scenarios and decision making. I think
yeah,
one of the scholars I was listening to, he said that the hikmah is to do the right thing at the right time,
yeah,
right? And in the context of that is to also say the right thing at the right time,
yeah.
and
I mean,
also to make
this
and
requires
also
lots
to,
of agency. We are
right,
empowering agency, individual agency here.
or also to make the right decision at the right
Yeah,
time. So all of these things like Hickman, all of them, I mean, as you mentioned, like, when we compare, again, you're talking about, the concept of like, the current education system was developed in the industrial era to develop these cogs. They didn't want them to think. They wanted them to be prisoner of their thought, right? As you give that example.
they wanted them to be obedient, mindless workers. I mean, you would
Absolute
tell that
cog in the
person to
system,
dig
right?
a hole for
You
the
talk
next
about
3 days. The person will dig a hole for the next 3 days without questioning why the hell this digging is important. Yeah.
and again the discussion between the system and the person, right? The structure
Yeah.
versus the agency.
Yeah. So hikmah is exercised by the individual, and modern institutional environment is basically anti-hikmah. You're not supposed to exercise any hikmah at all. Seriously.
Either way.
Yeah. So you are not supposed to have any hikmah at all. You cannot ask for that. You're working for a soft drink manufacturer. You are probably in the sales department, HR department. You're not supposed to ask how this soft drink ultimately affects the health of the whole society. Your sales manager getting bonuses for selling more soft drinks or selling more cigarettes or selling more junk food. And at the end of the day, you're not supposed to ask how does this ultimately affects any of the society at all. So you just need to shut down. You just need to focus on your assignments. You need to look at the what you are supposed to execute in terms of your responsibilities assigned to you by your organization. That's it. So you don't have to and this is what exactly educational environment prepares you for. You need to stop thinking, follow instructions. They might seem completely meaningless to you, but you're supposed to follow instructions. You're going to get some numbers at the end of the day, and this is what your ultimate success is based on, these numbers. So in the educational environment, you are getting numbers on your transcript. In the workplace, you are getting numbers in the form of your salary, and you're done. The more salary you're getting, the more successful you are. So that's what education environment is preparing. And unfortunately, Islamic education has not changed a bit of that. They
It's
just
not even dominating.
included Arabic. They just included a few. Uh, they might have changed the uniform. They have make students wear a cap, for example. They're using some Arabic uh, language while interaction, but the overall structure is ultimately the same, and it's very saddening because my kids are going to an Islamic school. I have pulled my daughter out, and now I'm finding ways how to de-school her, how to go her take her through
Unschooling.
unschool
Uns
uh, unschooling. Why? Because uh, the schooling environment has literally put lots of concepts into very fixed, rigid boxes, and those concepts are supposed to be applied in lots of different real life scenarios, and she's not able to, apply all of those
the
things
apply theory,
outside of
right?
that box. So a lot of de-schooling is now necessary, and she was going to an Islamic school,
Well,
and
there's an argument to be made, like, again, like the Islamic schools in Pakistan, if I understand it from the same perspective, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take some of the curriculum from the mother, so some of the curriculum from
yeah,
the Cambridge
from
system or whatnot.
Cambridge system, and they're just and they're
They're
thinking
It's just
of
like oil
mixing,
and water. You put them in the same box, and it will ruin there's a dichotomy
yeah,
that the children will have naturally. It's true because on one side you're teaching them the economic model of like time is money, and you have to make money on the and like
yeah,
store money and supply chain. On the other side, on Islamic side, you're teaching them no, interest is bad and usury is bad, and you're not supposed to hold it to increase the wealth and things of that nature. So again, this is yeah, it's very common. It is.
yeah.
That's
You
what I'm
had
saying.
it.
Like, we need to know. One of the very interesting thing is like wherever the colonials went, the very first thing they did, whether that was in here in a subcontinent or Africa or Americas or in Australia, is the very first institution that they installed was the education system wherever they went. And then
It was. I think it was the bureaucracy. It was.
no, what I mean by that, for
Uh,
mental thought, right? Bureaucracy was there, right?
uh,
I'm not talking about bureaucracy from a political perspective. But I'm talking about like changing this
uh,
thought of the people, the changing the mindset. The very first thing,
yeah,
as I said, like um, keep kill the Indian, keep the man. Kill what's inside of him, but
yeah,
keep the man. And as Thomas Macaulay here, he in Indian subcontinent, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that we have
yeah,
to develop people who look like them, but they think like us.
yeah.
What I mean? So again, so my point being is, again, because we were talking about the thought and the Islamic thought, the very first thing they did, and it only took them 100 years. It only took them 100
Yeah.
years to develop a system where they trained the people and they
Mm.
installed them at the higher top level of the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Whether that was political, bureaucratic,
Yeah.
or security and other things, and that is kind of like continuing into post-colonialism and neo-colonialism. So even
Yeah.
today,
Absolutely.
like they're not there, but like their agents are there. Like human agency is there, but it's their human agency. That's what
Yeah.
Islamic human agency. You mean, you mean so
Yeah.
like that system, it only took them 100 years. Like it only takes like 100 years. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did that with the Sahaba Ikram within 23, 30 years. And his Sahaba Ikram, like, developing that, one of the things, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the way what I'm really passionate about is he developed Ashab Ikram, the companions, right? And he gave them a vision beyond this world about the Akhirah. They didn't even they didn't even thought of think about this world. When they were passing away, they were happy because they would meet Allah. They would meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Sayyidina Usman, Sayyidina Bilal, Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid. All of these greats, they were happy that they were passing away because they will meet Allah and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after their passing. So so their vision and their passion was beyond this world, and their mission was like a global mission of Islam. So I think that agency, and Rasulullah, and we have this concept that we need 3 generations, and we have to start teaching kids from a very young age, which is untrue. I mean, we have to. It wouldn't take three generations. It shouldn't take 3 generations. It will just take this current generation, if you will, and to
Yeah.
inspire and transpire. We don't need to. It is just like, and they will have different people of different age, like yourself and myself. We are in, like, I guess, mid 40s. I'm in mid 40s. I don't know
Yeah.
about you,
I mean,
but
at the moment, we have one big additional task that was probably much easier during the time of Sahaba in comparison. That if I what I'm saying, if it is correct, that we have to unlearn a lot of things.
mm,
Um,
well,
and
they did too, right? I mean, they
because
had their own
that's
social custom from Quraysh, right? From their Quraysh, and then from
I
their
mean, the
tribe.
society was comparatively very simple in comparison.
Hmm.
Right now, society has the level of complexity has significantly increased, um, because if you ask any layman individual to explain you how things actually function, how the society actually function right now, I mean, to what extent they will be able to explain you? I mean, to what extent how the bureaucracy functions, how the politics function, how the but for somebody who's living in 1400 century ago, for a common individual, it was everything was right in front of them. Things were not that complicated. So right now things have become very complicated, and we have
Even in
a lot of
the
that
like village.
complication is completely unnecessary as well. It is
That
for
is
the
correct.
sake of,
But is that also true, like in the villages and the rural areas?
absolutely, absolutely. Things are very simple there also. So, as far as my understanding is concerned, the possibility of reviving an Islamic society is much more likely and easy in the rural areas, because things are very unstructured and very simple in that society. And I was reading this book recently by James C. Scott. The title of the book is the art of not being governed, and he talks about a place somewhere in Central Asia where the influence of nation state governments is very low. I mean, the nation states are not able to control the local people in that particular area very effectively. And that region spans from India to China to somewhere North Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. You know, there's this place which is at a height from the sea level. It's a mountainous region. There are lots of people who live there, and they follow their own norms. They follow their own customs. They follow their own way of living. They don't really look at how the state expects them to. I
Operate.
mean, they don't have the influence of the state level bureaucracy in those regions. So all of these governments, from Indian to Pakistani to Chinese to any other neighboring countries, all of them are actually struggling to have their influence in that specific area.
I think
And
Tibet is another example of that. Like Tibet, was like that until, I mean, I think still is in a sense. I mean, they do, uh, even though they have some kind of, like, I think, a king. kingdom or kingship, but it's in the convention, not in the contemporary terms, right? They are very uh
Um, they're more a tribalistic kind of people. They don't have very complex societies. I
same
mean,
thing.
there
It
are
was
lots of
similar
small
in Nepal
tribes.
until like recently when they changed their king. You
Maybe
know,
you can find a few that kingdom kind of thing in Nepal, but not probably in other regions. Some places, yes, some places probably not. So what I'm saying is that, I mean, in these kind of places where things are, which are not really exposed by modern technological, all of this institutional infrastructure, things are relatively slow. The family system is very much strong. The neighborhood, the idea of neighborhood is very much there. So you can bring uh, them toward that model of Islamic society much quickly as compared to you can do a neighborhood in a jungle of concrete where things are, fixed, so fixed that you cannot even move them around. For example, how do you create this concept of neighborhood inside an apartment that has 500 flats? And most people are living on rental basis. All right. So you have this 500 people of 500, you have a community of 500 people. All of them are unrelated. Most of them are probably unrelated. Few of them might be related to each other, but most of them are not. And they're living on rent. All right. And they don't know each other. And there's a very frequent transition going on. People are like moving out, moving in. So how do you create this concept of neighborhood in that jungle of concrete inside a very typical urban environment? So it's very hard to do because the physical infrastructure does not permit you to do that. So I'm just highlighting one particular aspect of the whole problem. There are so many other complex issues as well. Um, but when you go to these rural areas, especially areas in this zone referred to as Zomia, if you Google this term, Zomia, Zomia, you'll find this map of the region somewhere around China and upper India and upper northern area of Pakistan, that is referred to as Zomia. And in that region, for example, uh, things are not happening the way they are happening in typical urban environments. So वहाँ पे you have a much greater flexibility, I think, to bring them closer to, and probably they are already practicing Islam in a much better way, if they are, uh, if they have sufficient knowledge of what Islam expects them to do, then you'll find them to be practicing Islamic values and principles in a much more comprehensive way
I
in
think very good
comparison.
point you make. Like like Habib in UFC, and Islam, and they're probably a very good example of that. Like their father, and even though they are out here and they are doing their sports, but again, like when they go back to their village and their mountains, they're very true to their own tradition, and they're very
Yeah.
true to their people. And even like if you look at them, they're horse riding, they're doing wrestling, they're doing archeries, yeah, keeping cattle. So like even though they have so much wealth, but again, they are very humbled, uh, and having the. I think
Mm.
like as you mentioned, Iqbal said that, right? Something about like either that's Kohistani or Registani, right? People of the mountains
Yeah.
or people
Yeah.
of the desert. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's exact. So that's what it comes down to. I think they have a different build.
Yeah. So there the
And
challenge is more of tribalistic customs. Some of them might go against what Islam expects us to do. Some of them go way off from what Islam expects us to do.
Mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of this conflict going on between state institutions and uh, between the tribes living in these areas is based on the difference in the way they want things to be organized, and ultimately that takes a religious angle also. Ultimately, and we have fightings going on between the nation state governments, including Pakistani government. Is like, if you talk about Pakistani military doing operations in all of these places since a long time. And if you talk about Afghanistan, then you have wars going on since last almost 100 years. The Britishers went there, and then the Russians came, and then the USA tried to take over the place, and none of them were able to do that. And a lot of that has to do with the geography and the kind of culture uh, that is prevalent in these regions. So they simply do not accept any foreign, uh, structured, formal, institutional kind of an environment. and they persist on their own ways. And oftentimes that, you know, evolve into a very armed, violent conflict-like situation as well between different armies as well.
Right.
So
So,
that
Umar bhai, are you
unfortunately,
getting tired now? Are you okay?
um, probably,
Okay.
yeah.